Okay, so another vegan has called into the atheist experience. Let's see what anti-vegan trash Matt has for us today.
Okay, so my question is, does recognizing logic in something mean we have to act on it? For example, I recognize and can use a variety of data to prove that being a vegan is objectively better for the environment, certainly the animals, and even the individual in most cases. Now, even though I recognize this logic, is it wrong of me to not follow through and live my life according to this? And if it's not, why can't I, or anyone else for that matter, knowingly live in the falsehood of belief in a God if it allows me to live what I perceive as a better life subjectively?
Well, could you be wrong about what counts as a better life in your subjective view?
Now, they talk for a few minutes here about meta-ethics, so we're just going to skip over that.
A few minutes later.
But, like, to tie it back in with the veganism thing, I can demonstrate scientifically that it's the second largest contributor to climate change. So why would it not be morally in our best interest to not partake in something we don't have to? Hello?
Yeah.
Very powerful answer from Matt there.
So
You're
convinced of something that somebody else might not be convinced of.
But
now,
no, but it was. But
no,
but if I use science to, sorry.
You're convinced of something because you have findings of science. Now, I had a long discussion with Alex O'Connor, 2 hours, and a good chunk of it was about morality, and some portion of it was about animal rights and veganism and stuff like that. And it was an off-the-cuff conversation where I hadn't bothered to look into things. Alex made some of these points talking about how going vegan may be the best thing you can do to actually...
It was 2 hours of Alex politely walloping Matt, and I encourage you all to go and watch it.
Fight climate change. And he cited a number of references. Obviously, we're just sitting on a couch and we didn't have time to look into it. I've since had some time to look into it. And while there is some validity to the points that he was making, there are also objections to those points, which I haven't studied up on and don't have a way to go through it.
The classic Matt Dillahunty excuse. I just haven't looked at the data. Okay, Matt.
If it turns out...
Go on saying that for a few more years.
That eating meat, the process by which we go about it, etc., is ultimately going to kill us all, whether it's through climate change or whatever else.
Oh, that's not a high bar. It's not like it could be clearly wrong if it's not gonna, kill us all. It just has other bad consequences. It has to kill us all for it to be clearly morally wrong. I mean, just, it's kind of funny bar to set, and I'm sure he doesn't even set the bar that high, so why he would say this, I don't know.
Then of course we should stop doing that. The problem is that I'm not yet convinced that's the case. Other people are.
Why would someone have to show that that's the case, that it's going to kill everybody? It could be something not as bad as literally killing everybody and still be clearly morally wrong. Unless that is actually your bar, which would be, like, hilarious, right? If that's the bar, then, like, murdering people's fine because it's not going to kill everybody.
Okay, but, I mean, I'm not trying to...
Well, no, it seems what you're trying to do is to call in and talk about morality when you really wanted to talk about veganism.
Matt doesn't like when the vegans call. So this is number 2 on the Matt Dillahunty anti-vegan checklist. Keep in mind, this checklist is incomplete and will be updated as we as the future unfolds. But yeah, get mad that veganism is being discussed. We've seen this a good few times on the Atheist Experience.
Well, but I'm saying I see a moral contradiction in these.
And
things.
I don't.
See how you...
And I don't.
Matt gets really triggered if you tell him there's a contradiction. And I actually am pretty certain that Matt's view contains a contradiction. So he says that social contract, reciprocation, and species is the basis for moral value. So, like, if a being can reciprocate a social contract, if it belongs to a species that can, on average, reciprocate social contracts, then it has value, right? So, if it were just social contract, you could talk about the mentally disabled people. But they're members of a species who can reciprocate social contracts. So, according to that view, if we take the minds of the disabled people and put them into non-human bodies, then it should be fine to Holocaust them. I highly doubt Matt accepts the conclusion of his own view, so that's where we're going to get a contradiction. That it's simultaneously the case that it's ethical to murder a being so long as they belong to a species that can't reciprocate social contracts on average, and that it's not the case that it's fine to murder a being so long as they belong to a species that can't reciprocate social contracts on average. I'm pretty sure there'll be a contradiction there if that ever gets pried into deeply enough.
And I've explained it many, many times, including that conversation with Alex. Have you watched that conversation?
I haven't,
Okay.
but I'll definitely look into it.
Yeah.
But
my view of morality involves essentially a contract.
Good old social contract. So there's two formulations of the social contract thing that I'm aware of. You can talk about the fact that the social contract allows for the slaughter of animals, or the fact that animals can't reciprocate social contracts. So if the argument is just that the social contract allows for it, well, if the social contract allows for the slaughter of humans, apparently that's ethical. That seems completely insane. If it's about reciprocating the social contract, then we can just take the humans who can't reciprocate the social contract and it's fine to murder them. But I've seen Matt get pushed on that, and he has a backup point, which he says they belong to, where he says that they belong to a species that on average can reciprocate the social contract. So then you just say, oh, their minds are transferred out of the bodies of that species. And I've never heard anyone push him that far, but I highly doubt that he sticks to his view at that point.
That is based on the notion of moral virtues and moral obligations.
Nothing new there. The virtues versus obligations. Now, Matt loves to just riff on this concept of virtues versus obligations, but he never actually really clearly explains why eating meat is not an obligation, or he's not even convinced that it's a virtue. Like he never really says how we delineate between virtues and obligations. So I don't know why he likes to bring it up so much and riff on it. Like, I have a question I could ask in response. He thinks it's a moral obligation to not support a human holocaust. He's not convinced it's a moral obligation to not support an animal holocaust. What's true of the animal holocaust that, if true of the human holocaust, would cause it to become not a moral obligation to avoid supporting?
There are cases where if you don't take a certain action, it is necessarily immoral. And there are other cases where it's not immoral to not take the action, but it may be morally virtuous. If there's a kid standing in the street and a bus is coming, and it will cost me nothing and I'm at no risk to reach out and grab that child and pull them in, I would argue that I have a moral obligation, a moral duty to do that. But if it would involve me putting myself at risk, I may not have a moral duty, but it might still be morally virtuous of me to make that attempt. It might even be morally virtuous of me to sacrifice my own life in order to save that other person. And so with those differences, I have a moral contract that is undeniably speciesist.
Speciesism, though. So to anyone who's woke on the animal issue, that's just the equivalent of just saying, like, look, I have a moral system that's just, like, completely racist. Like, in the future, the fact that people said things like this will be laughed at. Like, how did people ever say these kind of things? Yeah, now, obviously, if we were just saying that it's fine to discriminate against other species, then we'd get hilarious conclusions, like when the Death Star blew up Alderaan, that was just, completely ethical. Those weren't humans. Just the destruction of Krypton, that was not a moral problem. You get, like, pretty hilarious conclusions if that's your view. So I highly doubt that Matt would say that it's morally neutral to fucking genocide an entire planet with a Death Star. So I doubt that it's just species per se that makes the difference for him. I want to know what it is in addition to species. What is, like, the sufficient criteria to justify discriminating against some kind of being, right? You can't just say I'm a speciesist, because there's other there's some species that you don't discriminate against just on the basis that they're of a different species. So there must be some further criteria that comes into play when we're talking about animals.
I draw a line at independent species, because just because there's a human being whose maybe brain doesn't function even on the level of a grasshopper, that doesn't mean that they're not that they are without value, because they have value to other humans, etc. I'm willing to extend that and to extend different rights and different moral contracts to a variety of different species. I'd put dolphins and great apes and other stuff.
Dolphins and great apes, though. So Matt always says this. Now, of course, you can't name the trait, between, like, a dolphin and a cow, or a great ape and a cow or something. What's true of the great ape that, if true of the cow, would cause it to become wrong to Holocaust cows? It's just an easy virtue signal of, like, I do care about animals, just, like, only certain ones. I guess virtue signal is mind reading, so, judge for yourself where he's coming from there. But yeah, I mean, this is just an easy thing for someone to say because we don't fucking eat dolphins and great apes, right? Of course. So yeah, good for you that you don't want to, discriminate against dolphins and great apes. I'd just love to know what it is that differentiates them from cows in your mind, morally speaking.
In a completely different category from grasshoppers. And anybody who doesn't, I think is nuts.
Matt also loves to rip on the low-level vegan memes, so what he just said was that it's nuts to put grasshoppers in the same moral category as great apes and dolphins. Of course, any rational vegan is going to agree with that, so that's just riffing against, like, really, really low-level veganism right there.
But where we draw the line, and I could be wrong, I'm not saying that as a dismissal of the thing, where we draw the line is something we're still working on.
Fuzzy line, though. So this is another one Matt loves. Just the line where we give something enough moral consideration not to Holocaust it. It's so fuzzy. Well, look, with a cow, apparently it's not clear that it's wrong to Holocaust them. I just want to know why. Like, what is it about the cow that, if it were the case for the human, would cause you to be unsure if they're over the fuzzy line or not?
And
Is it intelligence? Well, that would justify, holocausting the mentally disabled. I mean, what else would it be? Is it, like the fact that they provide nutritional value? I mean, that seems like it would justify murdering humans as long as they don't give you kuru. Like, just tell me, what is it about a cow that, if true of a human, would justify murdering them for food?
Not where you are necessarily yet, and this is not my issue.
Classic, Matt Dillahunty. Dodge right there. Yeah, so it's just the reason that he doesn't look into any of the data and continues regurgitating the same garbage arguments that have been destroyed by the community repeatedly is because it's just not his issue. Great.
So I haven't spent much time on it.
Oh, yeah, that's fair, and I understand, but I just have kind of a question. You said you would recognize that not eating meat is probably a morally more virtuous position.
No, I didn't say anything at all about not eating meat probably being a more virtuous position.
That's a pretty insane thing to say right there. It's not obvious that veganism is more virtuous. I mean, let's just look at what we're talking about here, right? So, like, this is just some footage of the Holocaust. Like, is it not obvious that if we were to not do this, it would be better? Is this not morally clear to you, Matt? Is something about this, just not obviously wrong, right? You're just not sure? I mean, yeah, seems legit. Nothing weird here. It's not obviously morally better to not support this. Nah, I mean, what's clearly wrong about this? Fucking lunatic. Okay, let's continue.
I said that it may be the case that not eating meat is the more morally virtuous position.
Maybe you don't think that that's kind of obvious?
No.
I'll just let this play. It's just not obvious. Who knows? It's not clear. Like, what the fuck is wrong with you?
You could be a more morally virtuous person if you don't eat meat, but that doesn't mean that I am an immoral person for eating meat. Do you think that eating meat is immoral?
So this is a classic Dillahunty right here. So this is eating meat per se isn't wrong, where he tries to trap the low-level vegans with this argument. He thinks, if I say eating meat isn't wrong, the vegan will, like, not totally realize what I'm saying, and they'll start saying, yeah, it is wrong, and then I can own them, because obviously eating meat itself isn't wrong. Like, what if it's lab meat? What if it comes from roadkill? Very, very creative there, Matt. I mean, it's not like this is an extraordinarily basic point that any rational vegan would agree with very easily. Like, why is this even worth mentioning?
Not if you need to.
Okay. What if you just want to? Is it immoral then?
See, he loves when someone plays into it. Like, this guy just doesn't know the arguments well enough. He doesn't realize what Matt's doing. But, like, who does this? When a vegan calls in, Matt loves to just run the clock out, right? Like, he loves to just bring up these garbage arguments, like, oh, eating meat per se isn't wrong, right? This is something that no rational vegan who understands the argument well is going to challenge. Of course, it's not just the eating of the meat that's wrong. It's what's entailed, what's required in order to get the meat there in front of you that we take issue with, right? But if Matt can get a low-level vegan to, like, start arguing that just eating meat is wrong, and then he can start making arguments that it's not wrong per se, just to run that clock out, you know, he'll do it.
I would argue if you have other options, if you're in an industrialized society, then yes, because you're knowingly choosing to do something that's causing harm to conscious beings.
So, no, I'm not. No, I'm not. Eating meat does not cause harm to conscious beings. If I find a deer on the side of the road and I eat that, I didn't cause that deer any harm.
So clever.
Is eating meat immoral?
Owned. Vegans wrecked.
Eating meat if the animal was dead due to natural causes, no. But if you are
so we're in agreement. Merely eating meat is not immoral. And so now the question becomes, when does it become immoral? And that's something that I'm not necessarily convinced of. Am I opposed to many of the harmful practices of factory farming and everything else? Yes.
This is another virtue signal. Like, forgive my mind reading, virtue signal, running out the clock. It's just I can't help that I have an assessment of his character at this point. I've spent so much time watching Matt Dillahunty talk about veganism. So he loves to say how he doesn't support factory farming, then he just goes and buys factory farmed meat. So this is complete lip service. It's just garbage. It's an absolutely meaningless virtue signal that he does not act on.
Am I opposed to somebody going out into their 400 acres and shooting a deer?
And if you want the proof of that, watch his discussion with Alex O'Connor, where Alex points out the meat will be factory farmed that they're eating that night, and Dillahunty says yes, right?
And eating it? No.
So essentially what you're saying is, and correct me if I'm wrong, you're saying that it depends on the context of in which you're eating meat.
Well, the eating meat part is irrelevant. It's the other actions that contribute to moral questions, not the eating of the meat.
But you don't think that it's kind of obvious that...
I don't give it... Okay, let's stop right now. Kind of obvious is not an argument. It's an assertion of opinion. I want arguments and evidence.
The guy came with data. He says that he can make this clear case, right? And you just said, you basically blew off the data earlier and said you haven't looked into it. Now he's asserting something is obvious, and you're saying you want the data. I mean, which way is it?
It's not, it's kind of obvious, because clearly it's not kind of obvious to me. But we have to move on because we're over time. Go watch the...
Ran the clock out nicely that time, Matt.
Video on Alex, and you can email me and I'll be happy to talk about it some more. But I got one more call to get to, so thanks for the call. Appreciate it.
Yep. So there you go. That's Matt Dillahunty on veganism doing his regular garbage. Now, if you guys like these videos, the best way to support is via Patreon. If you think that I give you value, consider giving some value back. I really do appreciate it. As little as $1 a month, if enough people do it, it's really helpful. It's easy to not keep in mind that, like, this is literally what I do for a living. This is what I rely on for income. So I do really hope that I can grow it and expand it. And if you guys are able to help with that, please do, because financial stability is a great thing. Okay, that is all for today. Consider patroning. Till next time.